All right, so this is Ezekiel's wheel, I guess you could say. It's really how the system in America works. Okay, you've got all these different independent systems. You have business, economics, um, slash finance, the incarceration system, the authority system, religion. Okay, so you have all these different systems. Okay, and this is really how America is designed to work. um, it's the New Jerusalem. Okay, Jerusalem was a city that you could practice your religion in, like no matter what religion you were back in the day. That's why there were pagans there. That's why there were Romans there. That's why the Jews were there. Jerusalem was like the only city that was, and it worked. And that was the thing about Jerusalem, and the Jews were running it. Um, but it was basically like the old America of the day. New Jersey was going to be called New Jerusalem, but it was a little bit that was a little bit too obvious. Okay, kind of like the movie You Got Served. Okay, like the reason why they brushed that movie under the rug, but everybody like remembers how, that phrase is a meaning to like doing a dance in front of somebody, like calling that type of psychology a service. Okay, like that's when body cams came out for police officers. All right, so like serve to protect and serve. Okay, the way they serve is the same psychology as serving somebody with a dance. Okay, it's really what the word is. The word is um, it's spiritual service. It's the highest form of intelligence. Is serving others with the word. You're bringing people to God. You're using love in a disciplined way to heal somebody's, to facilitate, their path of self-awareness. Okay, so that's really what the Jerusalem was back in the day. It was a system that had all these other different systems worked, and it worked. That's what America is. America is this one big system, okay, but you have to look at it. It's the way that it's free, or it used to be free, is that the people that ran the system had just as much freedom as like the regular like plebes or the serfs. This was back in like probably like the 1800s, okay, like maybe like the early 1800s, where the system that the founding fathers brought over here after raiding the Vatican before Napoleon, they developed this this perfect system, and that's how this system was seen as perfect because it was just as perfect for like the people who run it and control it, okay, like the secret like hidden groups and whatnot, the occult groups, and like just like the regular person, like just the average like like guilds, like that's what people did. They would like guild surf. I just made that word up, guild surf, and they would go from guild to guild. They guild hop because they would, and that's why like the average guy back in the 1800s was like very like overly intelligent. Because that's just the way people live. Like, you got paid to go to people join guilds, and that's basically getting paid to go to school. So everybody back then were doctors and like they were engineers, but they all had slaves though. So yeah. Anyways, um, so the military, so like the military industrial complex, and the police force and the incarceration system. Okay, so the incarceration system is a different system than the police force. So the police forces, they're the authorities. Okay, and that's why they dress blue, like the boys in blue. Okay, is because if you read the Bible, it talks about the Nephilim having blue skins, and that's who the Nephilim were. They were the authority figures that were on the planet back in hundreds of years ago. Um, and so that's why police officers, that's literally why they wear blue. How blue is a symbol of authority. Okay, people with blue eyes, all right, they come from like, the darkest areas from underneath the ground. So that's why it's like a recessive, blue is a recessive trait, because it shares that, genetics with the, basically the reptilians that made these bodies. Like that was the color of their skin, was kind of like a bluish color. And then you have green, okay, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like that's the military industrial complex. And so one force, you have the military, like they're fighting wars for other politicians and other places. And then you have the police force, and they're fighting inner city wars, okay? And instead of fighting, for the people that the military people are defending, the police force is fighting the people that the military people are defending. Okay, that's essentially what it is. All the riots and stuff, like the police states and whatnot. That's a different system. Okay, and you have the system of Hollywood. Okay, like there's a reason why there's a lot of CIA involvement, is because of how they go undercover. Okay, like the CIA is espionage, and like that's what actors kind of do when they go into characters. Like they're going undercover, and it's like they're voluntarily like stunting their own spiritual development by, inventing this personality and letting it, morph over them. Like Keanu Reeves, okay, the way Keanu Reeves, his personality changed when his on-screen character went from like a stoner surfer to like, this like lone shooter. Okay, you see where I'm going? Okay, and like it was an old pagan system, like holly tree, like the wood from holly trees is where the word Hollywood came from, because that's how like they made wands, like that's how pagans made wands in the Middle Ages, was wood from a holly tree, Hollywood, and they're like, telling everybody what to do, like quiet on the set, like movie makers, lights, cameras, actions, and then okay, like where else do you see that is in the incarceration system with mugshots, the way that cameras are used in that whole system, okay, which is separate than the authorities, separate than the police systems. How do you put a person on a shelf and turn that into a profitable business, basically, is what the incarceration system is. It's a system designed to create profits, It's like, who was Moses? He was the first lawbreaker, all right? So you see what he got, you see what he got. So anyways, then you have, all right, and then you have like different religions, like Freemasons, and the economic system, which the economic system comes from the Middle East. Okay, that's where you hear root words with like al in front of it, like algorithm, algebra, alchemy. Okay, these are all like Arabic root words. And the system of algebra, the way it controls the economy, is it's like, it's like a gift from God. Like something is such as a simple, basic mathematical system that can be used to, like regulate global enterprise, in like a free market, environment, I guess. It's kind of what algebra is for. That's the math that's used to control the economic system. And it comes from the Middle East. The Medici family, they paid Fibonacci to go study in Indian Arabic numeric tables. And when he came back, that's what they used to create the Renaissance. It was the Medici family that paid Fibonacci to go study that stuff. And that's literally where the Renaissance came. That's where today's economy come from. That was when they took over their system. It was like with the Renaissance, because they saw what they did down there. They're the ones that got edged out, I guess you could say. And You know the scene in The Lord of the Rings where it's like, you have my sword, my shield, my bow, and my axe. And Frodo's like, I'll take the ring. All right, like that's kind of what happened a long time. That's why all these like allegiances are around today, and like, you know, that scene from Lord of the Rings is based on like an actual event of like a distribution and separation of powers before basically the world came to an end like 500 years ago. That's why like Scottish and like Edinburgh, like the Scottish, right? Like they got like how, you know, you see what they got, like whiskey. They got fucking the psychology of like how architecture affects like feminine psychology. All right, like that's why it's the Scottish Rite, you know, is what controls Freemasonry. All right, and like, you know, so like there's like a distribution, separation, and it was the people, the Arabic people in the Middle East, okay, like they're the ones that got etched out of that deal, okay, they're the ones that got, you know, completely, yeah, and then like it didn't. You see, that's literally why there's a war over there. To still today, they're fighting a war from the Crusades. That were going on in the Crusades, and that's why the Knights Templar, like they wanted, you know, the Crusaders, not the Knights, the Crusaders. Knights Templar were Crusaders. That's why they wanted Jerusalem. They took everything around Jerusalem. That's why all that stuff is all around Europe. All those like Gothic cathedrals and whatnot. That's from the Crusaders, and the Crusaders, they were trying, but they couldn't. The Crusaders could not take Jerusalem because of the shit that's going on over there today. Was still going on back then, you know. It's literally, it's the Dead Sea. It's why it's called the Dead Sea. It's the lowest point on the planet, you know, and like it's just, it's no coincidence that Jesus found himself at his lowest point. And it's literally what, you know, the New Testament is about. Anyways, so, all right, we've got like, you know, even like technology systems, put a question mark next to that, you know, so we have like business, and that comes from like, systems of business is we can argue about where that came from, but like I'm just gonna say it came from England, okay. Crusades, like that's how this country was founded. Like the pen is mightier than the sword. Crusaders really came out of England, I think first. That's where a lot of them came out from first. But like, you know, like the Italians, like they were Crusaders. The Spanish they were Crusaders too. And you see like what they got. You see, you know how the languages have preserved. Anyways, then the system of economics comes from Arabia. The incarceration system, okay, like it's obvious, like there's Jews behind that because there's, you know, the Star of David. Like it's now they just make it a 5-pointed star. It's not a 6-pointed star. It used to be a 6-pointed star. It still is actually. They don't make it public anymore. And then, okay, like police, like authority, like that's the thing with uniforms. Okay, there's a psychology to putting on that uniform as of you know, a quote unquote service member, or, you know, authority figure. I'll say authority figure. You know, and it's they know it too when they put on that uniform. Like it changes who they are. Like there's a psychology to regalia, is what it's called. And Jews absolutely have control over stuff like that. Absolutely, because what Elvis wore on stage like was a regalia from the Order of Melchizedek. Okay, so like some of those like, you know, suits are like, you know very old, and it's just symbolic too. You can go to like oddity stores and see like, you know, Masonic suits from like the 1800s. You can pick one up for, you know, a couple $100 or something like that. It's a collector item. So like the regalia, you know, there's an absolute like fashion like is one of the largest industries on the planet. Okay, you know, like there's psychology behind that. It's your aura. Like it's literally like your psychology of like your aura. Okay, like we can say like that's why fashion is such a huge, thing on this planet. Okay. And so like religions and cults, like you guess you could call them the same thing. Freemasonry, Christianity, like there's no difference. There really is no difference between Christianity and Freemasonry. That's the funny thing about it. you know, System of Hollywood. That's so like how to use that's why this is why white people control Hollywood. It's because white people are good at knowing how to use their image to cause emotional reactions. Okay, and this is why white people were the shamans back in the day, is because they were basically singing like the story of creation. Like they were like kind of like the bards were the shamans. Okay, and that was the job of the actors. Like acting is like the oldest form of healthcare on the planet. It's like freaking older than massage. It's just like acting like it's not there, right? Like fake it till you make it, all right? Like so Hollywood is its own. It comes from the pagans. It's where like their dress imagery comes from. Is they were masters at it. They were knowing how to use images to cause emotional reactions. Okay, like that's what pagans were like masters at doing, and that's why Hollywood is a thing today. All right, and the military-industrial complex, which is completely like those are not inner city police officers. Those are not actors, even though when they go to war and like you have what's called the theater, which is where like the actual like combat is taking place. Okay, like they call that the theater. Okay, which is like there's your Hollywood. Okay, so Shakespeare says all the world is a stage. So. Military-industrial complex. That's its own. Get people convinced to go fight somebody else's war. Okay, and that's the system that reigns. Okay, that's the conservative system, and they know how to do data science on the collective consciousness. That's how they're making that happen, convincing the other people, because of they understand the psychology of love. That's really what God is. God is a word that Jews made up, that they got from Zoroastrianism, which is the concept of that God is a husband and a wife. That is the oldest belief in God in the world. And the Jews just saw that as like being one singular function, and they called it God. Okay? So, that's really like all these different, and that's why America works. That's what's crazy about America, is you have all these different, and like we're living in it, so we don't see it that way. Okay, we're too busy. We live our 9 to 5s. We get paid twice, once every 2 weeks. So our brain functions on a cycle, like bi-weekly. But the people that actually control the system, they believe that they get reincarnated here every lifetime. So they're thinking like in terms of like, hundreds, thousands of years. Okay, and that's how these elitists that control the world like think. It's just natural for them to think in terms of like, centuries and millennia. All right, so it's crazy. Like that's just how America works. Is you have all these systems that function together, and there's other ones. Okay, and then they function together. That's what America. It works. That's what America. Is that system actually functioning, and like that's America works like that. Like this is how it's like we live in it. We're living in it. But that's really what America is. It's all these different systems that have, kind of worked, but like functioning together, and that's what Atlantis is. That's who the Atlanteans really are. All right, are the people that, is the group of people that control that system, because like that's the system that reigns. Okay, this is the way all of the systems kind of function together, in like a free, open world. But like there's other things about the system that reigns that, it make it not work, because it's like the movie Metropolis, where you have a perfect, like fully functioning like society, but there's like a child in a basement, and it's just this like dystopian, extremist version of society. And it's the concept that, you basically can't have heaven if there's no suffering that's happening for it to exist. It's kind of what a dystopian world is psychologically. All right. But that's what the new Atlantis is. That's what America, the United States of America. Okay. The U.S. and America are two different entities. That's why it's called like the United States of America. Because that's what they're doing in politics. Is they're ripping apart the body of Christ and putting her back together differently each time, just so that they can rip her apart differently, for eternity. And that's really what they do when they make laws. And they use their pen and their ink to inseminate the paper, hold it up as gospels, and they can tear it apart with their logic through the word. And they can rewrite her, a new law, uphold her as gospel, tear her apart. It's a piece of paper. It's open, receptive, just like the feminine. All right. And that's the system of the state capitol. That's the system in Washington, D.C. And they, it's a system of creating, I guess, international? I don't know. D.C. is it's a different system than inner city, judicial systems. Okay, where they use police force in the incarceration system. But it's really, if you look at it from the perspective of like in the 1800s, it was a system that was designed to work just as good as, it's where coffee was like, 2 cents back then, because every man like was, intelligent enough to like know how to control the system. That's when like Karl Marx says to those people, because like that was when the system was changing. All right, like men weren't like that anymore. That was like the end of like their era. Okay, but like, they were ridiculously smart. Like the average person's intelligence in the early 18 was ridiculous. If you read books from like it was like they're using English, but in like a highly intellectual, logical way. And it was a different language. It was a completely different language that was being spoken like within like our own English language. That's why people don't read those books. They go study Machiavelli, like, and Shakespeare, and books like, even like the early 1900s, like guys still, like, they still spoke like, but it was like much less. Look at books from like the early 1900s, and like the mid to the, around like mid 1800s, I guess, because you start looking before that, and it's very muddy. History, it becomes very muddy. You don't know what's been refabricated, so finding original text, is not it's not that easy. There were cities, there were real cities back then, and that's what they've covered up, is the steampunk genre, Okay, so like now we're kind of going off in another subject here, and I'll end here, you know. But you know we're talking about colonialization and the steam engine, and like they were doing stuff with the steam engine that was on par with how the steampunk genre is depicted today. They were doing crazy stuff with the steam engine. The steam engine is yeah, they were absolutely doing crazy stuff with the steam engine back then. That's like what was going on in the South, and they said they lost the war, so everything's been like painted over. But those people, like, they knew what they were doing back. They were arguably more technologically advanced back then than we are today. And it's like the collective consciousness has been trying to evolve itself, but the dark presence that can influence this planet, it keeps like setting it back, and that's I guess the reset is what it's called. Basically, it's trying to control how Christ consciousness is incarnating onto this planet, maybe to convince itself that it's God. Getting off into some weird subjects here. Anyways, I guess I'll cut it off here. So all these different, that's what it is. It's America is. It's all these different systems that are from other parts of the world, but like all functioning here together in America. And that's literally it. We're like looking at it from the perspective of a, inside like a Persian, like an ornate Persian rug. Okay, so like when you're like crawling around in the rug, okay, like you don't see any patterns to it. Like if you're like a little bug crawling around in a Persian rug, it looks like a fort. Like there's no pattern or it's just chaos. Okay, but if you look at a Persian rug, okay, from like the perspective of a human, like standing over it, like take a few steps back, you see there's a design, there's intricacy, and it's very like ornate. That's really what Persian rugs kind of remind us is, that's the system that we live in. Okay, but like, we see it from the perspective of a buck, regular plebes, the serf class, whatever. We're not on TV. Our image isn't what's being used to, on TV to manipulate people, basically. And that's where a huge separation comes in at the collective scale. Is people who use their image to. So I look at like famous actors, and I'm just like, like, do I trust you? And who am I to judge? So I guess that's So America is the system of old systems functioning together. I mean, it's kind of coming. It's coming to an end right now, and the people that control it, they know it's not their system. All right, like, they know it's not their system, and it's with all this fourth industrial revolution with AI and quantum computing that's going on right now. These people that control everything, they're losing power. They're losing power fast, and they're just reacting in their own world how they think they need to in order to survive. What's going on right now, which is just another collective evolution, but there's a huge breaking point that's people are coming to, and it's the way the system is actually collapsing at this point. But I'm not saying like it's bad. The only way you can prepare for an apocalypse is spiritually. That's why Revelations, the book of Revelations, is about the apocalypse, because they're about the revelations that you have about yourself that brings about a personal apocalypse. Okay, so alrighty, deuces.